Good afternoon. Welcome to Cool Springs. Today is Monday, May the 19th, 2025. We're taping our midweek Bible study just a couple of days early because this coming Wednesday, our normal taping day, I'm going to be otherwise engaged. I'll be involved in a VBS training clinic. So we're doing our Ezekiel study today. We're looking at chapters 47 and 48, which are the last two chapters in the prophecy of Ezekiel. We've been doing Ezekiel now for a couple of months, and Ezekiel chapters 1 through 39 dealt with Ezekiel going into exile with the second wave of exiles, the visions and prophecies that God gave him to share with the people about why they were going into exile, the sins that they had committed that caused God to have to discipline them by taking them out of the land for a time being, the promises of God that a remnant would be restored back to the land once this time of punishment was over with, and judgment on the nations that took pleasure in or sought advantage of the fact that the nation had to go into exile in the first place. From chapters 40 through 48, the section we're in right now, Ezekiel was seeing visions of what was going to happen way off in the very distant future from his time frame. He is describing a temple that Bible scholars believe will be up and running during the millennial reign of Christ. You see, when Ezekiel first went into exile, there was a temple in Jerusalem, Solomon's temple. But what Ezekiel describes as the dimensions of the temple that he's seeing in this vision is way bigger and way more grandly appointed than Solomon's temple ever was. It's not the temple that they built after they came back from the exile, a temple that Ezekiel did not live to see. They were in exile for 70 years. When the Jewish people come back from the Babylonian exile, they're under the rule first of the Persians, then the Greeks. They revolt against the last Greek king, Antiochus IV, and shortly thereafter the Romans take over, and it's the Roman Empire that's up and running during the New Testament period. When they came back from that first exile into Babylon, though, the children of Israel started to rebuild a temple. But because they're now under foreign domination, they don't have the financial resources that their ancestors had when Solomon's temple was built. So they built a much smaller building, and some of the people who were senior citizens at the time and who were young children when they first went into exile and they remembered the beauty of Solomon's temple, they wept with sadness when they saw this much smaller, less well decorated building that was now functioning as the temple, because they were remembering the past. And they knew that the present wasn't as good as the past. But most of the people who were there at the dedication of that second temple were crying for joy. They were glad just to be back in their ancestral homeland and to be able to have permission to even build a building. They didn't care that it wasn't as beautiful and well appointed as the first building. They were just happy to have a place to live and to worship God. That building doesn't match the description in Ezekiel either. The vision that Ezekiel has of this future temple describes in detail the fact that there was going to be water coming forth from underneath the very sanctuary, the Temple Mount, going in two separate directions. One toward what we would call the Mediterranean Sea, the other toward the Dead Sea. And last week, when we ended up our discussion of Ezekiel chapters 45 and 46, what I suggested that everybody do was to look in books, get on the computer, and dial up photographs or videos of what the Dead Sea looks like today. From satellite images, we can tell that the Dead Sea, which used to be one body of water, is now two separate bodies of water. The reason for that is that the Dead Sea gets water from the Jordan River, flowing down from the northern part of Israel through the Sea of Galilee and down to the Dead Sea, which is the lowest place on planet Earth. The water flows in, but it has nowhere to flow out of because that's the lowest spot on Earth. And because it's in a desert environment, the heat of the daily sun evaporates some of the water, leaving behind the salts and the other minerals. The Dead Sea is the saltiest place on Earth. And because now in the 20th and 21st centuries, the nation of Israel exists as a nation, and they have lots of people in the country, and they're needing to get fresh water, and they're drawing fresh water from the Jordan River. And on the east side, the country of Jordan is also drawing fresh water from the Jordan River. Not as much water is going in, and the Dead Sea is shrinking in size because they overused it for drawing water out on both sides. Along about 1985, the water had receded enough in the Dead Sea to where there's now a small land bridge separating the northern Dead Sea from the southern Dead Sea. Why do we go into this several minutes worth of explaining what the Dead Sea looks like today? Because Ezekiel, 600 years before Christ, is prophesying and giving God's message, and he's telling them about water flowing from the temple that will one day heal the waters of part of the Dead Sea so that it can support life again, but that the other part of the Dead Sea won't be healed. To Ezekiel's readers in the 6th century BC, that didn't make any sense because the Dead Sea was one body of water. To people in Jesus' time, it wouldn't have made sense because the Dead Sea was one body of water. To people in all the centuries since then, up until roughly the year 1985 on our calendar, it didn't make any sense. But in 1985, like I said, the waters had receded enough in the Dead Sea to where now there is a land bridge that you literally could stand in either the country of Israel or Jordan and walk to the other country on this little land bridge and never get your feet wet. The Dead Sea has become two separate bodies of water. And so now when we read Ezekiel 47 and he describes what could happen, now it makes sense. I happen to have here a bottle of water. You can tell it's purchased water, it's distilled, fresh drinking water. It's clear, it's pure, it's perfectly good for me to do this, to open the cap and take a sip if I need to. And because I put the cap back on, it's still going to stay good. But if I took the cap off and let this water sit here, a fly could fly in, dust could come from the ceiling, an ant could crawl in, all kinds of things that could happen to where if I looked in the bottle and I saw dust or dirt or a dead fly, all of a sudden the water's not drinkable anymore. You see, when Ezekiel describes the fact that part of the sea will be teeming with life, will have so many fish, as many fish as there are in the Mediterranean, the Great Sea, that fishermen will be able to just keep catching fish. As long as the Dead Sea remained one body of water and remained the saltiest body of water on earth, that wouldn't be possible. But now for the last 40 years, the Dead Sea became two separate bodies of water, literally 40 years ago, because this is 2025. And as recently as 2010, just 15 years ago, scientists taking water samples at the Dead Sea began to notice something strange. And so they actually had to build special instruments to put them underwater because everything floats in the Dead Sea. If you went out and did what I asked you to do about looking for pictures and videos of the Dead Sea as it is today, you can find videos not only of people floating on the Dead Sea, but people taking things that are heavy objects like bowling balls, 10 to 13 pound bowling ball. You would expect a bowling ball, if you put it in your bathtub, your pool, at your house, some lake nearby where you live, because of the weight of the bowling ball, you'd expect it to sink to the bottom of the lake, the bottom of the pool. But on the Dead Sea, you can take a bowling ball and you can roll it out across the water and it just floats. Because the weight of the water is heavier than the weight of whatever object. Things don't sink in the Dead Sea. You have to force them to sink. So scientists had to develop special dive equipment to go down to the floor of the Dead Sea to try to figure out what was going on, because their readings didn't match what they thought they should be seeing, and they needed to find out why. They sent these probes down and they discovered that now there are some underwater springs bubbling up, that some very, very basic algae and microbic life is actually on the bottom of the Dead Sea. In other words, the Dead Sea isn't dead anymore. It's in the early stages of development because these springs coming up from underneath are providing the microbic life that over long periods of time could result in food growing in the Dead Sea, so that if fish were able to live more than a few days inside that environment, they could continue to eat and live like a fish in the ocean or a fish in some lake or river is able to do. But the Bible doesn't say that the Dead Sea is going to be healed by springs coming up from the floor of the sea, turning the 30% salty water eventually into water that's fresh enough to support marine life. The Bible tells us how the Dead Sea is going to be healed, and it tells us about it in Ezekiel chapter 47. And the exciting thing for you and me is, because we're alive in 2025, and we can now start to see some of the scientific effects of just the last 40 years, we can see how it's possible that when God fulfills this prophecy during that millennial reign and causes enough fresh water to come from underneath the Temple Mount and flow like a stream down to the Dead Sea, that the northern half of the Dead Sea will be so healed that it'll be able to support fish life. Ezekiel chapter 47. Then he brought me back to the door of the house, and behold, water was flowing from under the threshold of the house. And when it says house here, it's referring to the house of God, this millennial temple that he has described in chapters 40 through 46. Water was flowing from under the threshold of the house toward the east, for the house, the temple, faces east. And the water was flowing down from under, from the right side of the house, from the south of the altar. He, this angelic visitor who is taking Ezekiel on this tour of this future temple, he brought me out by the way of the north gate and led me around on the outside to the outer gate by way of the gate that faces east. And behold, water was trickling from the south side. You've seen water trickle out of a faucet, out of the beginnings of a stream when rainwater is on the ground and is on some hill or raised plot of ground, and it starts to trickle slowly down towards a low point. Ezekiel's standing on the eastern side of the temple, and he's seeing water begin to trickle from underneath the very sanctuary on the Temple Mount toward the east. When the man went out toward the east with a line in his hand, he measured 1,000 cubits. And he led me through the water, water reaching the ankles. So it starts out there at the temple with a little tiny trickle. And he goes out 1,000 cubits. A cubit is roughly 18 inches, just like from the tip of your elbow to the tip of your middle finger. And going out that far, he's now standing in water that reaches his ankles. Again, he measured 1,000 and led me through the water, water reaching the knees. Again, he measured 1,000 and led me through the water reaching the loins. That would be waist deep water. Again, he measured 1,000, and it was a river that I could not ford, for the water had risen enough water to swim in. A river that could not be forded. In other words, it's now such a mighty river that it can't be temporarily dammed up like a beaver might build a dam across a stream or a creek and the water starts to pile up behind the dam. He's saying this is enough water now where it went from a trickle, ankle deep, knee deep, waist deep. Now it's something that you'd have to swim in. He said to me, "Son of man, have you seen this?" Then he brought me back to the bank of the river. Now when I had returned, behold, on the bank of the river there were very many trees on the one side and on the other. So now you've got this huge river that's flowing from the Temple Mount down to the east toward the northern part of the Dead Sea, and trees are growing all over it. If you've had the privilege of going to Israel, and some of you have, you know that Jerusalem is on the edge of the desert. When you go to Jerusalem and you cross the Kidron Brook to the Mount of Olives, where the Garden of Gethsemane was at, there's trees and shrubs that are growing on that side because that side faces to the west and it gets enough rain. If you go to the top of the Mount of Olives, you can stand there looking west, and you're looking down on the city of Jerusalem and down directly onto the Temple Mount. Stand in the same spot, turn 180 degrees, and now you're facing east, and you can see the Jordan River, and you can see the top of the Dead Sea, and you see an awful lot of desert, because that's the dividing line between desert conditions and having normal shrubbery. He's describing now this water flowing from the temple that's headed toward the Dead Sea, and now trees are springing up on each side of this new river because there's a water source there to sustain the life of the trees. Then he said to me, "These waters go out toward the eastern region and go down into the Arabah. Then they go toward the sea, being made to flow into the sea. And the waters of the sea became fresh." That's verse 8, and you might want to highlight or underline that one. Take your notes. The waters of the sea became fresh. Ezekiel, a guy who lived 600 years before the time of Christ, is putting it in writing that the day is going to come when there's going to be water flowing from the Temple Mount down to the Dead Sea, and that half of the Dead Sea is going to become fresh water that can sustain sea life or fish life again. It's going to become fresh water. And he's just told you how God is going to do it. Several years ago, I was teaching an Ezekiel class out at the chapel for a Wednesday night Bible study. And at that point in time, this was around the 2009 time frame, there were some discussions going on between the country of Israel and the country of Jordan to where, because they recognize we've got a problem here, the Dead Sea is gradually shrinking, and if we don't do something about it, eventually the whole thing will dry up. We need to pump in more water, but there's not enough water coming down from the Jordan. And they were talking about building a pipeline from the Gulf of Aqaba, which is an arm of the Red Sea, doing a pipeline from there down to the Dead Sea and bringing in seawater that way to keep the Dead Sea alive and well, as far as having enough water in it. And one of the students in the class brought in a news article about Jordan and Israel talking about building this pipeline. And I just sort of shrugged and said, I don't know if they're going to build that pipeline or not, but here's the truth of the matter. Even if they waste all the money they want building this pipeline to pump in salt water to try to keep the Dead Sea from shriveling up, God's still going to make the Dead Sea become two separate bodies of water, because he's going to heal half of it, because this is what we're studying in Ezekiel. Well, sure enough, that was like 2009. This is 2025. They haven't built that pipeline. It's probably a good thing that they didn't waste money pumping more salt water into the Dead Sea. But I can rely on God's word that whenever the time is right in God's eyes, when it's time for that millennial kingdom, because that millennial temple has to be built, that God is going to see to it that part of the Dead Sea gets healed and becomes a freshwater lake that fishermen can go and catch nets and catch fish in. But that part of the Dead Sea is still going to stay dead throughout that millennial reign. And now that we live in the 21st century, we can see how it's possible for that to happen, which lets us know it's getting close to the time when God will fulfill his word. And the waters of the sea become fresh. The northern part of the Dead Sea is going to become fresh water. Not because of the springs that are coming from underneath, but because water is going to come down from underneath the Temple Mount. It's going to create a river that will allow trees and vegetation to grow on either side on its way down to the Dead Sea, a distance of about 20 miles or so. And that people will be able to catch fish, to eat and sell out of the formerly Dead Sea. It will come about that every living creature which swarms in every place where the river goes will live, and there will be very many fish. For these waters go there, and the others become fresh, so that everything will live where the river goes. In our modern day and time, there's a praise chorus that gets sung in many churches. The river of God sets our feet a dancing. The river of God fills our hearts with cheer. We will rejoice because the river is here. That's a song that's taken out of Ezekiel 47, describing what to us is still a future event, but it's a whole lot easier for us to see how the time is growing close than, say, people who lived in the area in the first part of the 20th century or in the 1800s or any time before 1985. Everything will live where the river goes, and it will come about that fishermen will stand beside it. From En-Gedi to En-Eglaim there will be a place for the spreading of nets. Their fish will be according to their kinds, like the fish of the great sea. That's their way of saying the Mediterranean. Very many. But its swamps and marshes will not become fresh. They will be left for salt. By the river on its bank, on one side and the other, will grow all kinds of trees for food. Their leaves will not wither, and their fruit will not fail. They will bear every month because their water flows from the sanctuary, and their fruit will be for food, and their leaves for healing. Consider this passage, and now I want to grab this Bible and turn to the book of Revelation, because Revelation is going to describe, toward the end of Revelation, what's going to happen during the end of that millennial reign, when Jesus has been on the throne, ruling and reigning here on planet Earth, and leading up to the great white throne judgment, where evil is finally confined to the second death, the lake of fire, and those who have opposed God are now separated from God for all eternity. Revelation chapter 21, starting in verse 10. And he carried me away in the Spirit, Holy Spirit. This is John, the beloved apostle, revealing what he saw that Jesus told him, write the things that you see, the things which are, and the things which will come after these things. And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain, and showed me the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, having the glory of God. Her brilliance was like a very costly stone, a stone of crystal clear jasper. It had a great and high wall with 12 gates, and at the 12 gates 12 angels, and names were written on them, which were the names of the 12 tribes of the sons of Israel. There were 3 gates on the east, 3 gates on the north, 3 gates on the south, and 3 on the west. And the wall of the city had 12 foundation stones, and on them were the 12 names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. The one who spoke with me had a golden measuring rod to measure the city and its gates and its wall. The city is laid out as a square, its length as great as its width. And he measured the city with the rod, 1,500 miles. Its length and width and height are equal. And he measured the wall, 72 yards according to human measurements, which are also angelic measurements. The material of the wall was jasper. The city was like pure gold, like clear glass. The foundation stones of the city were adorned with every kind of precious stone. The first foundation stone was jasper, the second sapphire, the third chalcedony, the fourth emerald, the fifth sardonyx, the sixth sardis, the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the ninth topaz, the 10th chrysoprase, the 11th jacinth, and the 12th amethyst. And the 12 gates were 12 pearls, each of the gates a single pearl. And the streets of the city were pure gold like transparent glass. I saw no temple in it, for the Lord God the Almighty and the Lamb are its temple, and the city has no need of the sun or the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God has illumined it, and its lamp is the Lamb. Lamb capitalized, a reference to Jesus. The nations will walk by its lights, and the kings of the earth will bring their glory into it. In daytime, for there will be no night there, the gates will never be closed. You don't need to close a gate from an enemy that's already been confined to separation from God in the lake of fire. The gates will never be closed, and they'll bring the glory and honor of the nations into it. And nothing unclean, and no one who practices abomination and lying shall ever come into it, but only those whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life. chapter 22. Then he showed me a river of the water of life, clear as crystal, coming from the throne of God and of the Lamb in the middle of its street. On either side of the river was the tree of life, bearing 12 kinds of fruit, yielding its fruit every month, and the leaves of the trees were for the healing of the nations. You see the parallel there? Ezekiel is describing this temple that's going to be built during the millennial reign of Christ, that 1,000-year period. And the river coming from the temple down toward the Dead Sea to bring the sea back to life again, at least in the northern half, will have on either side of this river trees that bear fruits every month, never a crop failure, and that these trees will have fruits and leaves that are good medicine to provide physical healing for mankind. Now we have the great white throne's already happened. Satan and all of the people who have chosen evil and all of the fallen angels have been consigned to the lake of fire. And now John sees the new Jerusalem coming down out of heaven. And he says, this Jerusalem, he doesn't see a temple in it. There's a physical temple in that millennial kingdom. But at the end of the millennium, when God is creating the new heavens and the new earth, he doesn't see a temple there, and he says we don't really need a temple anymore, because the Lamb and God are there dwelling among us, and we don't need the sun and the moon, because the Lamb provides the light and there's no more night. And he also describes water flowing from the temple, and that on either side of this river there are trees that provide healing foods for the people so that our bodies can experience life. Remember in the garden, Genesis and Revelation are bookends of God's story. There was a tree in the center of the garden. There was the tree of life. There was another tree nearby, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Adam and Eve were allowed to eat from any of the trees in the garden, except they were told, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you don't eat. What did they do? They ignored the fact that God had given them every other tree in the garden, including the tree of life, to eat from, and they went straight to the one forbidden tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And they took and they ate. And they brought into themselves the poison of a sin nature that they passed on to all of us. When God mercifully covered them with the animal's skin and kicked them out of the garden and put cherubim there with flaming swords to make sure that Adam and Eve didn't get back to the tree of life and make their situation worse by eating from the tree of life in their sinful condition, God was showing mercy to Adam and Eve and to everybody that would come from them. When Jesus pays the sin penalty for all of humanity 2 millennia later, we now have the path, the one and only path back to God. The day is going to come when the Lord will return. He will set up a physical kingdom here on earth. We will be down here ruling and reigning with him. Some people will be alive in their mortal bodies. We'll already have our glorified bodies if we're believers in Christ. Some people will have become believers during the tribulation, and those who manage to live through the tribulation will be in the millennial kingdom in their mortal bodies, and they will live to be 1,000 plus whatever age they were when the tribulation ended. And they're going to need to be able to eat from the trees that are flowing on the side of the river that God is going to create to heal the Dead Sea, as we're reading here in Ezekiel, so that their bodies will live for that length of time. At the end of that millennial reign, they too will get their glorified bodies and will still be able to eat for eternity from these trees that will grow because water is flowing from the temple of God to provide for eternal life for us. Back to Ezekiel 47, verse 13. Thus says the Lord God, this shall be the boundary by which you shall divide the land for an inheritance among the 12 tribes of Israel. Joseph shall have 2 portions. You shall divide it for an inheritance, each one equally with the other. For I swore to give it to your forefathers, and this land shall fall to you as an inheritance. This shall be the boundary of the land. On the north side, from the great sea, by the way of Hethlon, to the entrance of Zedad, Hamath, Beroth, Sibrium, which is between the border of Damascus and the border of Hamath, Hazar Hatticon, which is by the border of Haran. The boundary shall extend from the sea to Hazar Enan at the border of Damascus, and even on the north, toward the north, is the border of Hamath. That's the north side. The east side shall be from between Haran, Damascus, Gilead, and the land of Israel, shall be the Jordan. From the north border to the eastern sea you shall measure. This is the east side. The south side, toward the south, shall extend from Tamar as far as the waters of Meribath Kadesh, to the brook of Egypt, and to the great sea. That would be over toward the Mediterranean. This is the south side toward the south. The west side shall be the great sea, the Mediterranean, from the south border to the point opposite Lebo Hamath. This is the west side. So you shall divide the land among yourselves according to the tribes of Israel. You shall divide it by lot for an inheritance among yourselves and among the aliens who stay in your midst, who bring forth sons in your midst. They shall be to you as the native born among the sons of Israel. They shall be allotted an inheritance among you with the tribes of Israel. And in the tribes with which the alien stays, there you shall give him his inheritance, declares the Lord. Chapter 48, the division of the land. He's already told them where the borders are going to be. Jerusalem has its borders, and it's way bigger than what the current city of Jerusalem is. And he's giving you the north side, the east side, the south side, and the west side going all around it. Now in 48, he's describing the land that each of the tribes is going to get that'll stretch from the Mediterranean. I kind of need the map here. Let me grab this map and bring it over. This map shows the Mediterranean, Israel as it has its recognized borders today, Judea and Samaria, the world calls it the West Bank, that's under dispute, and then the countries of Jordan, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, the other countries around. What's going to happen in this millennial kingdom that Ezekiel is describing is the 12 tribes of Israel are going to have borders that go from north to south, running all the way over to where the Euphrates River is at. The Euphrates River will run through what we would know as Iraq, parts of Jordan, Syria, all the way up to its headwaters in Turkey. So chapter 48 here is going to describe the tribal divisions of the land. Now these are the names of the tribes. From the northern extremity, by the way of Hethion to Lebo Hamath, as far as Hazar Enan at the border of Damascus, toward the north, besides Hamath, running from east to west, Dan, one portion. So the northernmost tribe is going to be Dan. I want you to notice that Dan is one of the concubine sons. He is the son of Rachel's maidservant Bilhah. Beside the border of Dan, from the east side to the west side, Asher, one portion. Asher is another concubine son. He is the son of Zilpah, the servant of Leah. Beside the border of Asher, from east to west, Naphtali, one portion. Naphtali is another concubine son. Beside the border of Naphtali, from the east side to the west side, Manasseh, one portion. Manasseh is one of Joseph's two boys. Beside the border of Manasseh, from east to west, Ephraim, one portion. Beside the border of Ephraim, from east side to the west side, Reuben, one portion. These are now the sons of the wives, Leah and Rachel. Beside the border of Reuben, from east to west side, Judah, one portion. Beside the border of Judah, from east to west, shall be the allotment which you shall set apart, 25,000 cubits in width, and its length like one of the portions from the east side to the west side, and the sanctuary in the middle of it. The allotment you shall set apart to the Lord shall be 25,000 cubits in length and 10,000 in width. The holy allotment shall be for these, namely the priest. So that's going to be the tribe of Levi that gets the portion that's right there at Jerusalem. They are going to be the ones who are going to minister in the temple, and they have to have the territory closest to the temple. It shall be for the priests who are sanctified from the sons of Zadok, who've kept my charge, who did not go astray when the sons of Israel went astray, as the Levites went astray. So out of all the Levite tribes, out of all the descendants of Aaron, only the descendants of Aaron who are from the tribe of Zadok are now allowed to be full priests. Other Levites can assist them. It shall be an allotment to them from the allotment of the land, a most holy place by the border of the Levites. Along the border of the priests, the Levites shall have 25,000 cubits in length and 10,000 in width. The whole length shall be 25,000 cubits and the width 10,000. Moreover, they shall not sell or exchange any of it or alienate this choice portion of land. So it's like the best of the best, the choice portion of land. Just like you may go to a grocery store or a butcher shop and you tell the butcher you want the choicest cut of whatever type of meat it is you want to purchase and serve. This is the choicest land. It's holy to the Lord. The remainder, 5,000 cubits in width and 25,000 in length, shall be for the common use for the city, for dwellings, for open spaces, and the city shall be in its midst. These shall be its measurements. The north side, 4,500 cubits. The south side, 4,500 cubits. The east side, 4,500. And the west side, 4,500. The city shall have open spaces on the north, 250 cubits, the south, 250, the east, 250, the west, 250. The remainder of its length along the holy allotment shall be 10,000 cubits toward the east and 10,000 toward the west. It shall be alongside the holy allotment, and its produce shall be food for the workers of the city. The workers of the city out of all the tribes of Israel shall cultivate it. The whole allotment shall be 25,000 by 25,000 cubits. You shall set apart the holy allotment, a square, with the property of the city. The remainder shall be for the prince. That's going to be David, who is going to rule and reign underneath Jesus from Jerusalem during this millennial kingdom. The remainder shall be for the prince on one side and on the other of the holy allotment and of the property of the city. in front of the 25,000 cubits of the allotment toward the east border and westward, in front of the 25,000 toward the west border, alongside the portions, it shall be for the prince. The holy allotment and the sanctuary of the house shall be in the middle of it, exclusive of the property of the Levites and the property of the city, which are in the middle of that which belongs to the prince. Everything between the border of Judah and the border of Benjamin shall be for the prince. The city of Jerusalem throughout biblical history is located in the tribal territory of Benjamin. Benjamin is the youngest of Jacob's 12 sons. He's also the only one who was actually born in the promised land. Jacob had his other 11 sons when he was living up in Syria with Uncle Laban. But Benjamin was born in the land, and therefore, when they did the tribal allotment back in the time of Joshua, Benjamin was given the land that ultimately would include the city of Jabus, later Jerusalem, that became the capital of the nation. So we've had Dan, Asher, Naphtali, Reuben, Manasseh, and Ephraim on the north. Now you've got the Levite and the prince's portion, and now Benjamin's portion, and they're going to keep going southward with each tribe getting land that'll go from the Med all the way over to the Euphrates River. As for the rest of the tribes from the east to the west, Benjamin, one portion. Beside the border of Benjamin, from the east to the west side, Simeon, one portion. Beside the border of Simeon, from east to west, Issachar, one portion. Beside the border of Issachar, to the east side, Zebulun, one portion. Benjamin, Simeon, Issachar, and Zebulun are all sons of wives, either Rachel, in Benjamin's case, or Leah for Issachar and Zebulun and Simeon. After Zebulun, beside the border of Zebulun from the east to the west side, Gad. Gad is another concubine's son. And beside the border of Gad at the south and the west side, the border shall be from Tamar to the waters of Meribath Kadesh, the brook of Egypt, to the great sea. This is the land which you shall divide by lot to the tribes of Israel for an inheritance. And these are their several proportions, declares the Lord. Then he goes to describing the city gates for Jerusalem. These are the exits of the city. On the north side, 4,500 cubits by measurement, shall be the gates of the city, named for the tribes of Israel, 3 gates toward the north. The northern gates' names will be Reuben, Judah, and Levi. Those are all sons of Leah. On the east side shall be 3 gates: Joseph, Benjamin, Rachel's boys, and the son of Rachel's maidservant, Dan, on the east side. On the south side, 3 gates: Simeon, Issachar, and Zebulun, Leah's boys. On the west side, 4,500 cubits, 3 gates: Gad, Asher, Naphtali, concubine sons. The city shall be 18,000 cubits round about, and the name of the city from that day shall be, The Lord is Here. That's the end of Ezekiel's vision, the end of his prophecies, some of which he's seen come true in his lifetime. He saw Solomon's temple go down. He saw people carried into exile. He did not live to see the people return from exile and build the second temple that was destroyed by the Romans. But he saw into the future because God allowed him to see that one day the Dead Sea would become two separate seas, one of which is going to be healed, the other of which is never going to be healed. You and I can see that part's already beginning to come true. They're two separate bodies of water. There's fresh water coming up from below, but there's going to be a river coming from Jerusalem that will do the healing of the Dead Sea so that fish will be able to live long-term in it. There's going to be a millennial temple built that we'll get to see, whether we're part of the rapture generation or whether we die and meet our loved ones in the air when the Lord does return for the rapture. We'll already have our glorified bodies and we'll be down here ruling and reigning for that 1,000-year period. So we're going to go get to see and visit Jerusalem. We'll get to see what God does. We'll be there when the Lord assigns the proportions to each of the tribes and they inherit the land, all of the land that was promised to them. You and I are going to see Satan overcome, evil confined to the lake of fire, and we will get to dwell in person on a new heaven and a new earth in the presence of God for eternity. What a promise for the future. What a wonderful thing to look forward to. Thanks for watching.